what I ought to do, what I must do. It's an exegesis. It's a way of interpreting the world. The exegesis itself is a symptom of certain psychological conditions, likewise of a particular spiritual level of prevalence judgments. What Nietzsche is saying in this quote with respect to our moral interpretation as understood at this point, we'll have a proper moral interpretation, is that it's an exegesis, a way of interpreting the world. Right? So if I'm here and we have what is the case and what ought to be the case here, I look at what is the case. And immediately I say, you know what? You're not doing the right thing in your life. You need to be doing something better with your life. You ought to be doing this. It's a way of interpreting, but the very mechanism, this is very important, this is very, very important. The very mechanism, the very structure, the very process of ethical deliberation we have to acknowledge is a systematic way of casting judgment. You ought to do X, and the point is, on whose merit ought I to do X? Why should I do X? You say this is what I ought to do. Why should I do it? Under whose power? Under whose authority do you get the right to tell me what I ought to do? Right? And we see the discourse. Now, of course, I'm trivializing it a bit, right? It's not that everything sort of then falls into an anarchist state, by no means. But the point is, a discourse inherently of morality assumes a discourse of judgment. Its very nature is a discourse of judgment, because I'm telling you what you ought to do. I am prescribing. Not describing. When I talk about what is the case, it's a descriptive account. When I talk about what ought to be the case, it's a prescriptive account. Ethics is a system of prescription. And when we take that ought, and we, in a Kantian sense, it doesn't have to be Kantian, but he hammers Kant, so let's use Kant. When we universalize that ought and say, now we have an ought that everyone has to accord with, everyone has to do, Nietzsche says, this is the greatest tragedy that we could ever make. It is a tragedy, right? It is a tragedy, in the real sense of tragedy, because we have posited for ourselves our own self-destruction. We have posited for ourselves our own failure. And all that we do in this system of ethical judgment is realize and actualize failure. Failure after failure after failure after failure after failure. Because we have misconstrued that will to ought, I guess, rather than recognizing the will to power. And the biggest misconception, and I really have sort of a pet peeve on this, is that the biggest misconception with respect to the will to power, and not in the Nietzschean sense, just sort of contemporary, sort of, you'll see business guys talking about power, will to power, is that it's this big corruptive game, that the only way you get about attaining power is by kissing up to the instructor and undermining your other friend and backstabbing and biting. That might help in certain situations, but they codified that as law. And insofar as they codified it as law, they're completely undermining what Nietzsche said, because he wouldn't have codified it in law. You can actually go about the attainment of power in a completely ethical way. I know for a fact that my being where I am in life now, I've gotten here in a completely ethical way, quote-unquote ethical way. You might not have agreed if you would have known everything that I had to do in order to get here with everything that I did in my life. But what Nietzsche would recognize is that I created a standard in which I could actualize perpetual attainment of power. And people want that. Businesses want that. This guy's going to make me money. This guy's going to get me stronger. Right? They want that. Once you emit that energy into the world, people want that. People want to be around that. People want to touch that. They want to taste that. They want to feel that, because they recognize that insofar as, for whatever reason, I am not built in that manner, at least I'm affiliated with someone who can generate that right? So this will, this becoming, this process of actualizing is a process. It's not possible without recognizing the process in which the power is transmitted. The last thing for Nietzsche, and I think this is again self-generating process. The last thing for Nietzsche in this section, just one last bit of no 254, and actually I want to read that directly. 254. He says, 254. What did I put on the corner? Redefining life. Yeah. He says, what are our evaluations and moral tables really worth? Right? What is the outcome of their rule? For whom? In relation to what? Answer, life. Answer for life. But what is life? Here we need a new, more definite formulation of the concept life. My formulation for it is life is a will to power. What is the meaning of the act of evaluation itself? Does it point back or down to another metaphysical world, as Kant still believed, who belongs before the great historical movement? Basically meaning, does it become sort of this a priori condition? In short, where does it originate? Or did it not originate? Answer, our moral evaluation is an exegesis, a way of interpreting. The exegesis is itself a symptom of certain psychological conditions. Likewise, of particular spiritual levels of prevalence judgments. Who interprets? Our effects. Right? The process of morality is contingent on not only prescriptions, but interpretations of those prescriptions. Who's interpreting? We recognize on a religious sense that the prescriptions are interpreted by the sacerdotal class, by the priest. The priests determine whether or not your actions are moral or immoral. I mean, I know that's a rough generalization. There's law and dogma and blah, blah, blah. But the priest has the power, right? Will to power. The priest has the power. So, based on the prescriptions, the priest is going to assess. So you have to come before the priest, and the priest will say, well, what does the scripture say? What did you do? I'm going to be the judge, and not really be the judge, but I'm going to be a conduit of the judge and make an assessment. That assessment is an interpretation of your action. So insofar, and this is where it gets complicated, I don't want to get too deep, but insofar, try and follow along because I can't make this any simpler, but insofar as you subordinate, for lack of a better word, yourself to a system of interpretation, insofar as you subordinate yourself to a system of interpretation, you immediately subjugate that will. Your will has to be suppressed because it's not about your will. It's about the conformity of your will to those who are interpreting. And that's the dilemma. That's where we have really at its deepest level, not as deep as a little bit deeper, but at a very, very deep level, this really becomes more of the ontological discussion in the distinction between the immoralist and the moralist, right? It's not just that the immoralists act badly in the world, it's not that at all. But the immoralist really at a very, very complex, deep level recognizes that insofar as I play the game, subjugate my will to interpretation, my act open to interpretation, I lend my power to another, and I'll be damned if I do that. I sort of play by my own rules, if you will. Of course, we're not talking legal stuff, right? We're talking sort of philosophical, right? I am the type of individual that recognizes that insofar as there is a thing that I need in this world, whatever that thing might be, the next lecture series, the next book, the next, good discussion, the next analysis, then I cannot allow that process, which is who I am, of becoming, perpetually, to be subordinated to interpretation of another. I don't really care what anyone thinks about this YouTube channel. I don't really care about if people think I'm a good philosopher, bad philosopher, smart, not smart, can do logic, can't do logic. I've heard all types of stuff. How is it black people? Somebody's commented like, how is it I never knew that a black guy could do logic. It doesn't really bother me. I can't, right? I didn't think you were able to. Don't worry about it. Just watch the game. Let's just go, right? There is a sense in which if I'm conscious, if I'm cognizant, if I'm perpetually interested in the interpretations of others, how others perceive me, I can't be who I am. because so much of who I am then becomes contingent on whether you like me or not. So then I just end up being a puppet. Oh, do they like me? Let me do something that they'll enjoy. Oh, they don't like that, so I won't do that anymore. No, it's not about really, I hate to say it like this, but no offense. I'm talking to the camera, right? No offense, it's not about you, it's about me, right? It's about me. And I invite you to participate in this exchange of power. And for those who want to participate, let's trade power. Let's make each other stronger. For those who don't want to participate, no sweat off my back. That's the unfolding process. Okay, so